Today on the Mr. Maple podcast, Matt and Tim discuss witches' brooms and count down the top 20 for your garden.
Konnichiwa, y'all, and welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. I'm Matt. Today we're going to be talking to you a little bit about witches' brooms.
Hey, y'all. I'm Tim. We're going to talk about witches' brooms. We're going to go into a little bit about, some of the mythos behind the witches' brooms. We're going to go a little bit about, what might actually be causing these things. And then we're going to give you our top 20 witches' broom Japanese maples.
Yeah, no Harry Potter going on here. These are Japanese maple witches' brooms. Really cool genetic mutations that make these shorter, more compact, more heat-tolerant mutations. They're highly sought after for so many reasons, whether it's container gardening or in the landscape. We're going to break it down for you. We're going to tell you some of the causes that may cause this and just get into the whole thing. I'm a big fan of Japanese maples, as you know, and witches' brooms bring something extra to the table just by being that small, compact, dense habit. They really add to the overall genetics of maples so much.
And y'all, if you love Japanese maples, you love gardening, make sure you subscribe to our podcast. Give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform. We're the Mr. Maple Podcast. I mean, no one's bringing it for you each and every week, a podcast on Japanese maples. And we also do a video on YouTube. That's a video component to this as well. You can go check that out, get involved in the live chat. Those typically air on Sundays at 8 p.m. The Mr. Maple Show on YouTube, we put out daily YouTube videos. So if you love this podcast, you might want to be subscribed to that as well. We're MrMaple.com, though. We're a family mail order business. We ship directly to your door, and we do over 1,000 varieties of Japanese maples. So we'd appreciate if you shopped with us.
So let's get into it. Like Tim said, this is the talk show that we bring it to you weekly, and we talk about Japanese maples. Now, we haven't done a whole podcast yet dedicated to witches' brooms, what they are, what makes them interesting, and there's so much diversity within Japanese maples. But a part of those genetics arrive from this interesting mutation. So one of the whole parts of the story here doesn't come from seeds and it doesn't come from sports, but it comes from these genetic mutations called brooms. Now, you can look at these however you want. They're kind of a small, compact, almost looks like if you see them out of leaf, it almost looks like a squirrel's nest. So there's these little genetic mutations that occur, and by grafting that wood that's occurring there on the broom, you can create a whole genetic new tree different from the original, normally with completely different shapes, completely different textures, and it just opens a whole new avenue for, genetics in Japanese maples.
Yeah, I mean, I love witches' brooms because they give you a lot of what you like about some of the tree that it was on, but then you get it more dwarf and compact, and it can even change colors and the leaf morphology as well, which is really cool. Whenever I was actually looking up some of the stuff that Dick Wolf had done, I knew he did some paperwork on his witches' broom selections, and some of them we don't even have in the nursery trade today.
Yeah, I still need Red Devil, so if you got Red Devil out there, shoot us a line. I'm ready to get that one. I'm always collecting, so I'm never done. And there's definitely a few of those on that Red Maple Nurseries list that have kind of disappeared to time.
Well, whenever I was looking for the Dick Wolf stuff, I was like, where's this? I was on Google Scholar, and I was like, I think this is where I found it before. And I found that at Northwest A&F University, Yangling, which is in the Shanghai province in China, they found a tree that they thought had witch's broom characteristics. And they did a lot of research on this, what they thought was a witch's broom characteristic. And they found that it was a phytoplasmic disease that was carried by phytoplasma, which are carried by leafhoppers and plants that suck on sap. Mm-hmm. And the more I started reading into this, like, man, this is really interesting. Maybe this is what's the truth behind what's causing witches' brooms. I mean, this was 2011 when they found this. They did research since and published this article. And then I started looking at the photos, and the photos have, slightly shortened center nodes, but it looks nothing like what we think of as a witch's broom on a Japanese maple. I mean, it's tighter, dense, compact. The nodes are shorter, but it really just looks like damaged growth.
So we had Billy Schwartz present to the Maple Society a few years ago on witches' brooms, and Billy's definitely one of the top authorities on brooms. I think him and Bob McCaffrey have found more brooms than probably anybody else on the planet. I mean, they're definitely 1 and 2. And those guys have found so many different brooms and named them. Billy probably, more so than anybody, at least pivotally early on. Billy's the broom guy. He's found so many of them. And Billy's theory is that it has to do with gamma radiation and kind of sunspots. And he's got a very developed theory on how, the gamma radiation is creating this kind of mutated spot there in the tree. There's so many different interesting and intellectual arguments for how these come about.
Now, when they did research with conifers, they often found conifer witches' brooms in cemeteries. And when they did tests on the witches' brooms and the trees, they found formaldehyde in in the witch's broom and the parent tree that has the witch's broom happening on it. And I thought that was interesting because they were thinking that formaldehyde might have been the issue there. But then you look at these other witches' brooms and there's not formaldehyde on them.
Well, there's definitely genetic testing that's proven there's more organic matter of animals breaking down on the brooms too. So one theory was that the deceased were actually causing these brooms there as well. There's so many different crazy theories about how they became. But another thing was power lines. You're definitely finding more brooms along cutbacks where there were power lines. Now, maybe they cut back and then those brooms were expressed, because you definitely find pine brooms more frequently along those cutbacks.
And then the question is the witch's broom there because the power line's there and you get more sun radiation? Or is it there because you're cutting it back so much that you're seeing more growth happen,
and then expression,
and then it shows you can find witches' brooms there because of that?
I tend to lean a little bit more toward Billy Short's theory, I think, than most. I think he's at least able to defend his theory on it more. But I've seen some, there's all kinds of different ideas here. Certainly, there's different types of brooms too. Like we've seen, parasitic plants and parasitic insects create brooms on plants. I've seen a broom form on Chairman at UT because of the insects, because the ants in the tree damaged the tree and formed a broom on it. I've seen, brooms in Japanese maples form because of mistletoe. Mistletoe growing in the tree created this broom-like characteristic by altering the genes. Now, I do find that those don't tend to work from grafting. Like those tend to be ones that revert back and clean up. So as soon as you kind of graft them to a good, healthy palmatum understock, you start to get what was hurting the tree out of it, and it tends to turn back into the original form.
Now, also, I've seen almost a lot of the witches' brooms that we've went and seen the original brooms on. There's always birds' nests in the brooms, and you wonder,
which came first.
You wonder if the the bird being there with its nest is, possibly pooping a lot on these branches with chemicals from different berries they've eaten, which may cause some weird mutation.
Yeah, which happened first? Did the bird get drawn to the broom because it was the denser spot in the tree? Did the squirrel go to the broom because it was the better hideout? Or did the squirrel create the broom? We don't know. But it definitely looks like a squirrel's nest and a bird's nest. You'll find these little genetic mutations. They're interesting. I mean, we found one in a tree locally around here. It was in a Sangu Kaku, and we named it Cupid. And the reason we found that tree was because it was at a completely different stage going into fall color than the rest of the plant. So it was very easy to identify that this part of the tree hadn't quite went into the full fall color that the rest of the tree had. It was more green than the rest of it. The overall tree was still going in. So you're definitely getting this different expression of genetics so far that it can even change the fall color. It can make them more heat tolerant. It can make them less likely to revert if they're variegated. It can do all these different weird things, but no one can really quite explain what's going on. Maybe it is the Harry Potter. Maybe it's just magic. It's just witch's broom magic.
Now, the thing is about these witch's brooms is they're just so darn cute out there in the landscape. And that's the reason why people love them so much, is because they fit in these small spaces. They're tighter, dense, compact, and basically you can get a dwarf or a miniature Japanese maple out of it. And it's so cool. I like what Bob McCaffrey says at Alpine Nursery. He says these are blessings. He doesn't call them a witch's broom. He calls them a blessing. And it's really true, because these are blessings from God that we can take, graft, and put out there in the nursery trade. I think they originally started getting the name witch's broom because that tighter, dense, compact habit looked like a broom upside down. And then there's this mystique about them. How did it get there? And that's where it became a witch's broom out of it. But, with Japanese maples, all of these different things could possibly be things causing mutations. I mean, what we do know they are is they are a mutation of some sort.
And everybody could be right. All those things could be actually causing mutations.
Yeah, I mean, all these different things could be things that cause a witch's broom on a Japanese maple. And it's so interesting because, I mean, if you found a way to create witch's brooms, I mean,
Right.
you would have just some of the coolest trees in the nursery trade. You'd be like, oh, let's go create a witch's broom on Makawi Yatabusa.
Now you are doing the magic.
I mean, that would be the mad scientist in me is, you know, what is causing these mutations? How do we create these in other plants? And that's just part of the excitement about this.
You know, one thing I think before we get into our list too that's interesting is that it is exclusive to certain species as well. Like you definitely see it some, like there's sugar maples. I know there's some sugar maple brooms. There's some platanoides brooms. But specifically to Japanese maples and their kin, you only typically see it in palmatum and then in the American native circinatum. And that may be that's some level of hybridization between the circinatum and the palmatum already. But you only typically see this in circinatums and palmatum. I've never seen a japonicum broom, a Siboldianum broom, a Shirasawanum broom. And those are some of the main sources of our cultivars when it comes to Japanese maple. So it is an interesting thing of variability there too. Those would be interesting brooms to find. But currently, to my knowledge, they've only been found in palmatum and circinatum and that tight-knit group of maples.
And part of it too is that a lot of witch's brooms are found, you can find them on any aged tree, but often they're found on very old Japanese maples. And what you see is this old Japanese maple, you know, out in the landscape. And off of that, you see this unique trunk. And as a witch's broom develops, it creates this weird, gnarly trunk right at the base. It looks almost like it's been grafted.
Yeah, oftentimes it can be bigger and like missized to the root. So it doesn't look like it fits with it.
It looks like it's been grafted onto the tree and that there's some sort of graft incompatibility slightly. And you see this huge bulge right where the witch's broom starts. And that is this indicator of a witch's broom that typically is something that you can graft and will be fairly stable.
Now, another key indicator here, but it's not always indicative of a witch's broom, is that shortened center node. So sometimes you'll see a shortened center node. That means that middle lobe there on the leaf is rounded. So it's certainly a prominent trait, but I wouldn't say it is a disqualifying trait to ones that are not. There's certainly witch's brooms that don't have that trait.
Yeah, that's for sure. And then we also have to think about these as witch's brooms that are developing. And I always often wonder is, you know, these brooms that we're finding that don't have the shortened center nodes, if we come back and look at them at a later point,
right,
do they develop that shortened center node? I mean, are there different stages of witch's broom development?
If you're taking grafts off of Shana 60 years ago and Shana now, are you still getting the exact same thing?
Exactly. Like when that broom was just forming, what did it look like versus what it is today? And there's not a lot of research done on witch's brooms. All we have are experiences of what we're seeing.
Yeah, and there's definitely different categories. I mean, I think we need somebody, maybe a geneticist, who can kind of break some of this down too, but we also have these things, and for lack of a better term, we've almost called them bud sports, that are like the more columnar, larger growing brooms. We'll have a few of those on this list, but they're different. They're almost different genetically than the compact, dense habit we get from a true broom.
I mean, you can get super geeky with witch's brooms, and witch's brooms with Japanese
maples.
maples.
We're doing here today.
Exactly. And when it comes to witch's brooms, there's so many introductions that have been found by Bob McCaffrey and Billy Schwartz. Those two have found the more witch's brooms on Japanese maples than anybody else. Now, a lot of Bob McCaffrey's witch's brooms aren't on our list. We're going to start talking about.
They're fairly newer, so they need some more evaluation. There's some super popular ones in there. I mean, those ones are really, a lot of the ones are named with Catholic names, and those have been very popular. I think more evaluation needs to be done before they get into that superstar status to really figure out which ones are the most durable and best, but some home run hitters for sure.
And we're probably going to get into our top 20 list. I mean, witch's brooms, they're so cool. And you've probably got some of these in your landscape, and you might not even know that they were a witch's broom. But a dwarf compact form of a Japanese maple fits in so many people's spots in their yard because the landscape is ever shrinking. Yards are shrinking. And having a tighter compact Japanese maple makes a great tree for your landscape.
So one more thing I'd like to discuss is that sports and brooms are different. We did a whole video on our YouTube channel about what is a broom. We take you to show you one in the landscape there. We need to do an update sometime in the spring about what is a sport. Sports typically change the genetics of the tree somewhat. You'll get a variegated tree or a different leaf shape going on, but it doesn't make it more compact. You're getting a variegated form of that might look like rainbow variegation coming out of a red tree. You're getting a sport that changed that tree and typically variegated it. But generally, it doesn't change the morphology of the plant. Like you're looking at the same leaf shape, you're looking at the same shape of the overall plant as the parent plant. Now, you might be able to isolate that sport and graft it and continue it on from grafting, but it's very different genetically than a broom. That's going to make this whole new creature there in the landscape.
What about that broom type thing we found at East High years ago that had the chainsaw effect? It was on a fire glow, and instead of being in the short and center node in the center, it had a short and center node on the middle right node or the middle left node.
It's like you never say never with this because, nature will, as soon as you say this is the rules for witches' brooms, you'll find an exception to it. So we've certainly seen that in our careers that there's so many exceptions to the rules and there's so many things that we can't explain. But they're very interesting. They're almost this like mythological side of Japanese maples. Do you want to do some of the honorable mentions?
Yeah, honorable mention. First, I'll throw in one of Bob McCaffrey's introductions, Babe's Dwarf. Again, this is one that, it's still an evaluation for us, but it gives a really nice red color in the spring.
Now, legend had it, this was found at Babe Ruth's graveside. So, I mean, if you're a Babe Ruth fan, that's why it's called Babe's Dwarf.
It's pretty awesome. Gives a good red fall color, tighter, compact. Gets a little green during the summer. 3 to 4 foot dwarf in 10 years. Definitely a cool witch's broom that I think is going to be making its way on the scene in years to come.
All right, Little Embers is one that we were actually talking at a garden club, and we were explaining what a broom is, and a lady raised her hand and said, "I've got that." And so we said, "We are coming to your garden today." And so we did, and we drove to her garden, and sure enough, she did have it. It was a broom on a seedling from Glowing Embers. So there was a seedling from Glowing Embers, and then she had similar genetics going on to the original Glowing Embers cultivar, but then a broom on top of that. So it had slightly different fall color, made it to the trade as Little Embers. Cool tree.
Now, next up, our uncle was telling us, he said, "Tim, I've got a witch's broom in our yard, in my yard."
We were skeptical.
And I drove over to my uncle's home, not far from East High, and said, "Yeah, that definitely is a witch's broom." And it was just this, looked like a squirrel's nest. So we grafted it. It's on a green Acer palmatum. And our aunt, his wife, was named Mary. And so we called this one Little Lamb.
Yeah, really cool. Another, evaluation here at the Area 51 collection may make it into the trade. Another one that we actually found and we're playing around with is an Osaka Zuki broom. Now, we were at another customer's home, and Tim was calling us shots one day. We walked around this garden. We walked to the garden talking about Babe Ruth. Tim walked into the garden and said, "I'm finding a witch's broom in here." So he started calling the shot. He did find one. It wasn't this one. It was actually on Hanamanishiki, and we called that one Carolina broom. So another little honorable mention there. But in that same garden, we found a broom on Osaka Zuki. Just an interesting one. Had a short and center node, has that dense compact habit of Osaka Zuki. Sometimes it cleans up and doesn't have it. We're playing around with it. It'd be very interesting if this one developed into, say, something like a Rhode Island red-shaped Osaka Zuki. That'd be very useful.
That's what we're looking for, and we're hoping that that's what this can turn into. And, we put in honorable mentions just to talk about it, but, this may not develop into anything.
Yeah.
It's one of those things,
Witch's brooms are one of those things you have to graft them, and then you really have to evaluate how they perform after graft, because sometimes a graft could clean those genetics completely up, and you're just going to get a similar tree. Like you might clean all that up. I've grafted like that jigsaw chainsaw looking one Tim was talking about. We grafted that. It was certainly a reoccurring trait in this tree and the specific branching, and from graft, none of that replicated. So you have to kind of evaluate the grafts for a long time after to see if they can retain those characteristics.
But then we have to ask ourselves, did we graft that broom too early? Was it fully developed? And if
Sure.
we go back and graft those now, do we get a different stage? And that's where we're learning about witches' brooms. I mean, witches' brooms, there's this mystery behind them, and that's part of the fun about this. It's exciting, it's unique, and it's trying to learn a lot about these plants that no one's really done a lot of research on.
And you can get as deep into this as you want. I mean, there's broom hunting, and you can get up into the, anywhere you want, especially where there's a lot of native pines and that are highly desirable native pines to have brooms on. It really depends on your species, whether it's considered more of a trash plant or a highly sought after plant is the honest answer. I mean, you can find brooms on piceas, on pines, on cedruses, and some of these things are going to be more highly sought after than others. So it really depends on the ornamental qualities of that individual broom and the species.
And we've been talking about Japanese maples, but broom hunters is a real thing. Gary G and some of our friends up north.
How about in Europe?
They will, in Europe especially, they will get in the car and drive around for hours looking specifically for witches' brooms. They'll cut those witches' brooms out, come back and graft them. and then those branches that that they've cut those witches' brooms off will hang up at their nursery like horns on a deer.
Yeah, it's like the expedition
and that's their trophy.
of the hunt. Yeah,
it's like that was the original broom right there, and they'll keep that as and hang those limbs up, and that's just such a cool way to do it. But I mean, you really, with maple brooms, there's not that many, and people often find them a lot up in the Pacific Northeast, and no, not Pacific Northeast. They find it up in the Northeast, a lot of witches' brooms. And it's probably because there's a lot of older Japanese maples there. There's not as many older Japanese maples in other parts of the country until you really start digging and looking around. And I think that's probably why Billy Schwartz and Bob McCaffrey have, such a good time finding them, is because there's just so many old Japanese maples that were planted there, some by our founding fathers, and shortly thereafter.
All right, so one more honorable mention here. We have Wolf's Broom. This one was named after famous nurseryman Dick Wolf. Go watch our video on Red Maple Nurseries. It was actually a return gift. This one was found by Billy Schwartz. He returned the favor after Dick Wolf named a broom for someone in his family. We'll see if that one's later on the list.
All right, so we're getting into the top 20 witches' broom Japanese maples. And I threw one in here, Acer circinatum, Little Jim.
Yeah, it's interesting, like I said, that circinatums are that other species within Palmata that we find prominent brooms in. I think palmatum is really the main one we see, and I would say 99% of our brooms in the trade come from palmatum. But those circinatums certainly do bring it. Now, maybe their propensity to hybridize in the Pacific Northeast or Northwest with palmatum, maybe they have a little bit of palmatum influence on them, and that's why they have that propensity to broom. Tim and I will we've even went to the original Hoyt WB there at the Hoyt Arboretum. We'll graft from the parent plant. When we go visit the original Shana, we'll graft from the parent plant because we want to see if those genetics are replicated from the parent plant as well. So we get a little geeky about this kind of stuff. Little Jim, interesting. This one was originally called Eileen Cook. I think Little Jim's been the accepted name on it. It might have been Highway 205 at one point as well. There was this discussion at one point that all witches' brooms should only have the name of the area they were found in. That way, if somebody else finds the same broom, they won't rename it. That's a good idea in theory, but I mean, who wants Highway 204 or 205 or whatever? Nobody wants those names. That's not a marketable name. So it's a good theory, in theory, if your street name has an awesome name. I mean, if you're on Electric Avenue, yeah, I'm all about it, right? But if you're on, just some random road, I don't think it's going to add anything to the overall marketability of the plant. Now, it certainly helps if you'll disclose that so that future generations don't rename the same plant. But there you go.
Now, like Matt mentioned before, we often wonder if you have a witch's broom on a Japanese maple, if the parent tree itself has a higher propensity to throw another witch's broom again, if that mutation could possibly happen on that same tree. And if that did happen, is it going to be the same as the original witch's broom, like on WB Hoyt, which is a witch's broom that happened in the Hoyt Arboretum? If you found a witch's broom on a graft of the parent tree, is it going to be identical to WB Hoyt, or is it going to show differences? And that is something that's so interesting to us, especially when you get into many of the Japanese maples that have differing characteristics, because witches' brooms can display very different characteristics than their parent trees.
So that's kind of a good segue into our number 19 plant, and that is Englishtown. Englishtown's an interesting broom. This is a red broom, often can have some almost like purplish colors to it. It's a really fun color pattern to it. Englishtown is a broom that does have a propensity to have a broom on it. So interestingly enough, you'll see in the trade also Englishtown WB with different genetics. The original Englishtown broom doesn't typically throw, the same short and center node. And I've seen this tree in Ed Shin's garden as well as Charlie Morgan's garden. And you may know him, Amazing Maples and Crazy Conifers. We were touring his garden many years ago there in Seattle, and we saw an Englishtown with another Englishtown WB formed on it. And when talking with Elizabeth Mundy, she said this is a real common trait that she sees, even in containerized Englishtowns, that they'll have this secondary broom going on them. So it's kind of interesting. Once we were talking with some nurserymen, and it can almost sometimes be called a broomery, where you'll have a tree that continues to throw brooms on within the same tree. And this one's interesting because it is a broom on a broom.
And this is what got our mind thinking about this. I mean, Englishtown was a witch's broom that was found in a shopping center. And, we recently did a video on comparing red dwarfs at Don Schmidt Nursery. We do a sort of in-depth look at Englishtown. But Englishtown itself doesn't, it's a broom, but it doesn't throw on the short and center nodes. Mm-hmm. And I remember the very first time we were at Green Mansion Nurseries with Billy Schwartz, and he had this Englishtown, and he said, now check this out. It's a broom on a broom. And it got us really looking at Englishtown more and got us thinking more in depth about these witches' brooms and what they could do. But it was so interesting because the Englishtown WB, the leaf morphology changed, where it's a thinner leaf. It's a little more, it's got the short and center node, but the color changed on it too. And instead of having this pink-red color, we get a lot more bronzes with pinks, like
So
a
weird.
pink to pink bronze. And
There's definitely some magic occurring right there. That's magic.
And then the fall color for us is a little more orange rather than just red. So something is going on where it throws this broom that changes its characteristics drastically on what it's expressing. It's not just a dwarf mutation of its parent. It is a dwarf mutation that is different. And is that a witch's broom?
Yeah, it's so weird. And so like that's even different than what I was saying as a broomery, because that's a broom on a broom. I believe it was nurseryman Dave Ricade who was telling me, and his family's found many brooms, some in maples, but also many in conifers. And he was telling me about the broomery where like a tree that has a broom already on it has a higher propensity to throw you another broom. So he'll go back and check trees with a broom on them to see if they have a secondary conifer broom a lot of times.
That's crazy. And he's found so many brooms on conifers, a lot of tight dents. I mean, some of these conifers that only just, grow, half an inch a year, I mean, kind of thing. I mean, it's crazy. Now, coming in at number 18, we've got Acer palmatum Skeeter's broom.
This one just makes everybody chuckle. Feel like there's some redneck dude named Skeeter out there. I think everybody hears this and they're like, oh, Skeeter's broom. But it was actually named by a guy named Skeeter Rod in Connecticut. Really cool tree. This one is another one of those that breaks that mold for the compact, dense, round ball. Like a lot of these we're going to talk about, pretty similar shapes. Not all of them are the same, but a lot of them are going to be 4x4, 5x5, kind of these little meatballs there in the landscape that make that rounded, compact, dense habit to them. They kind of grow similar in their habits. Skeeter's broom doesn't do that at all. I mean, it makes a tight but wide but thick, full upright tree.
It's a Christmas tree.
Yeah.
It's a red Christmas tree shape on a Japanese maple. I mean, it's crazy how it has that unique shape. It's one of those things that just has that unique style out there in the landscape. And with that wide sort of shape that comes to a point towards the top, it gives a unique shape for a Japanese maple. There's nothing else quite like it with that wide base that then comes up to that point. And the fall color on Skeeter's broom, it's electric. I mean, you can get some really nice crimson reds out of Skeeter's broom. You get some bright reds in the spring as well. I know that Richard Bomar down in Simpsonville, South Carolina, had a huge Skeeter's broom that we fell in love with. And it became one of the reasons why we started producing so many Skeeter's broom today at Mr. Maple.
Yeah, it's got the columnar habit to it, but it's more narrow than columnar. Like it's got some width to it. It's got a very full, thick look to it, which is nice. I mean, a lot of people want to use some of these to hide something. They want to cover up a neighbor. They want to have some, especially when it's in leaf, to have that density there. And this certainly can give you that density down low and as it grows. I mean, it's going to be more of I'd say 10 to 12 foot tall tree even in 15 years. So it fills out to be more kind of like a fire glow's expected height overall. So it does grow at that kind of that moderate mid pace, but with a dense, full, thick. You don't see through it and you don't see around it typically. It's a nice width to it.
And with Skeeter's broom, you get a good number of the lobes with those short and center nodes. And it's very visible on this tree. It's one of those things, like you mentioned earlier, may actually be more of like a bud sport, but we're considering it a witch's broom because it does have that short and center node in this category. We're considering it in that broom kind of family.
One guy in our chat last week told me he had a witch's broom on Sir Happy. I was like, man, you're trying to make the most impossible plant to graft of all time. Can you even see that? Is it just like, here it is? That's it. You can't see it at all. You just show them a blank pot because that thing's going to be so small and so wimpy, you're never going to see it.
I remember when Billy Schwartz sent us this long, elaborate letter on how to graft witches' brooms and how you should graft them on, this very thin wood onto thin rootstock that has been old out in the landscape. And so he's like, the fresh rootstock that is so thick, it's too sappy. It pushes too much. It will never take on that. And, you know, he's like, this is what separates the men from the boys. And Matt and I grafted the witch's broom he'd sent us.
I believe it was me, actually.
Matt grafted the witch's broom that he'd sent us. And literally, Billy called us back up and said, guys, I didn't get any to take, did y'all? And Matt said, well, that's what separates the men from the boys, Billy.
I had to aggravate him a little bit on that one. A little bit of bragging rights on him never hurts, because he's certainly not afraid to let you know he's found more brooms than anybody ever. Go listen to our podcast with Billy Schwartz. It is a hoot, and he's one of my favorite people in Maples to talk about. Next up on our list at number 17, we've got Acer palmatum. Shocker there, Shadeva Gold.
Now, Shadeva Gold was found as a broom on the cultivar Aoyagi, and it's a tighter, denser, more compact, green bark Japanese maple.
Now, you don't always get that short and center node on this one. In fact, I very rarely see it. I have seen a few branches with it before, but it's not one that's commonly going to have that short and center node. That's why I always like to let people know it's not always indicative of some of these. Sometimes you'll see a slight amount of that, but it isn't something that continues completely. This one's fun because you get everything you like about Aoyagi in a denser habit. Now, certainly that gold comes about in that fall color, because this thing has an electric yellow fall color. You actually get some nice, you know, yellowish lime green bark, especially that lime green bark in the winter months.
Yeah, and this is just one of those plants that gives you that winter interest. I mean, many Japanese maples give you, you know, that great spring color, great summer color. And with Shadeva Gold, you get a lively green. We're talking a bright, bright, bright green. It's a brighter green than many of the other Japanese maples in the spring and the summer. Some great fall color, but that winter interest is amazing. And the fact that this is shorter and denser and more compact means that you get to see more of that green bark even during the winter.
All right, next up here at number 16, we've got Little Joe. Now, this was a broom found by our friend Dr. Kernetsky. He actually shared it with us first, so we were actually able to evaluate this one. At first, we just had it as, I think, Dr. Kernetsky WB. He later told us he was going to put the name Little Joe on there.
It was named after his brother that had passed away, and it just has a tight, compact, dense form. And, you know, our first glance at this is this going to be another green witch's broom? Because there's already some other green witch's brooms in the nursery trade. And we're very particular whenever we're, you know, deciding.
We found a lot of brooms that we don't introduce, quite frankly.
Yeah, is this something that's going to stand out from the crowd? And the new growth on Little Joe is outstanding. It grabbed our attention. You get some really nice shades of pink new growth coming across Little Joe on top of the green, so it definitely deserves a spot in the landscape.
I was really impressed with this one this spring. It had a ton of pink in it. So it was lime green on the older growth, but that new growth, especially in that secondary flush, was this brilliant shade of just pink to almost pink white. Like, it really caught my eye. I know I did a short with it and put it on our YouTube channel because I was just like, that is just popping right now. That Little Joe looks amazing. Really nice tight compactness to it. This one's typically going to be more like 4x4 and that denser habit overall to it. And yeah, the colors blew me away on it. I think you get some real interesting, at least overlaying shades of pink.
The other thing, too, is the fall color on it was a really good shade of red for us. I mean, bright, fiery red in a container. And often, witches' brooms in young ages don't show as good of a fall color the first, you know, in a 1 gallon. And we've got some really good fall colors on Little Joe that which really impressed me as a
Now, witches' brooms will fool people at first. Sometimes people look at a witch's broom, especially in a 1 gallon or a 3 gallon, they think, man, these things are vigorous. And what often happens with witches' brooms, even Little Joe, they'll kind of throw out a ton of growth, but then slow down, tighten up, and densen up a ton. So that first little bit of growth after graft, you tend to see that be some of the most vigorous growth you'll have. And so they'll shoot up a little bit of height, but then they throw on all that interior density to them that makes them more broom-like overall. So don't let some of these fool you in a 1 gallon. They will look a little taller, but what happens there is that secondary growth really fills in.
So coming in at number 15, we've got a Japanese maple witch's broom that happened in Japan called Kodo Maru.
I love this plant. This is one of my favorites. You know, I often like to throw this one almost in that hime form category. Like, it reminds me a lot about Kodo hime, you know, Murasaki Kyo hime, some of those type things. And it almost is like the broom form of those. Now, I couldn't tell you that Murasaki Kyo hime wasn't originally found as a broom. I don't know the origin of that one originally, but it doesn't have that short and center node. And Kodo Maru has that short and center node, that purple border, a lot of those traits that we love about the himes. I would say even in a tighter, denser, compact habit as well.
Now, this makes me wonder, you know, we know Billy Schwartz, we know Bob McCaffrey. Is there a witch's broom guy in Japan that's finding witch's brooms on tons of old Japanese maples in Japan?
There's got to be. I mean, yeah. We need to go meet that guy and go travel with him. That's the broom hunting expedition I want to be on. Like in the Japanese Alps. That's the place where you hunt for Japanese maple witches.
I remember going up to the top of Mount Fuji and seeing a witch's broom happening in one of the lyrics there.
Yeah, I think I found that.
Yeah, you found that one, and we found one in a cherry tree.
You never want to be riding with Tim after I find a broom first. That's the worst. That's the worst scenario. That's probably the most danger you can be in your whole life. Is for us to be driving down the road. Tim's driving. And I say, hey, check out that witch's broom. And we've got 4 hours to go because he is hitting the curbs hard the rest of the time looking for them brooms. Do not let me find a broom. This guy will literally go out of his way to not be beaten and find a broom then. So just a little tidbit for saving your life there. Don't ride with Tim when he's looking for brooms.
Now, Koto Maru, it's a selection from Japan. The name means rounded harp. And the thing about this witch's broom, which is very different, is it has a really nice orange-red border around each and every leaf in the early spring when it leaves. It has really tiny foliage and one of the tightest, densest compact habits. So if it was a witch's broom on a cultivar, it wouldn't surprise me that it was a witch's broom on a dwarf, because it is truly a small dwarf Japanese maple. And again, these witch's brooms, they can happen anywhere. They can happen in Europe. They can happen in Australia. They can happen anywhere around the world. And so if you're listening to this podcast, keep an eye out on your Japanese maples. It's not just North America that finds these neat witch's brooms.
All right, y'all, coming in here at number 14, we've got Tiny Tim himself, Acer palmatum Tiny Tim. Now, this was a broom not named for my tiny younger brother here, but actually named by Billy Schwartz. He found this one. It's one of the many great additions he did to the nursery trade. He found this one at Fairmont Park. I wouldn't be surprised if Dick Wolf didn't know about this one as well in that kind of time frame of which he'd found it. But Billy actually put the name on this one, and it became in the trade through the name Tiny Tim. Large, mature green palmatum there. Real big broom going on in that, and he found it and named it Tiny Tim.
Now, later on, Billy also found a witch's broom not too far away from this that we put the name on, Tiny Tim number 2. And it was within 100 yards of where the original Tiny Tim was found on a witch's broom. The characteristics were very, very similar, though. They were both green Japanese maples. I
was always a little skeptical if it was the same plant, to be honest with you. I'm not because it was clearly a 40-year-old broom as well, so it had been there.
Yeah, and so it had been there. And there was a stump, though, about 100 yards away where he said the original Tiny Tim was. And so he said he'd been eyeing this other broom for a long time, even before the other one was cut down. But, again, I was very skeptical, too, because they look very, very similar. The brooms, after evaluation, didn't appear to be different enough for us to have Tiny Tim 2 in the nursery trade and Tiny Tim. So we just went back to producing Tiny Tim. But Tiny Tim, it has a really small, compact habit. We had one at Maplewood Gardens for a while, and really nice green color in the spring, some good red fall color. And, of course, with a name like Tim, everyone's going to love it.
Now, these brooms seem to really exceed in warmer climates. I would say they're even a little bit more heat tolerant sometimes than the trees they were found on. Japanese maples work zones 5 through 9. I would say a lot of your brooms really excel in that 6 through 9 kind of setting, though.
And speaking of zone 9, I was just thinking about the tree we saw down at SFA Gardens of Tiny Tim.
That thing was not tiny anymore. It was huge.
It was not. And weird things happen in these high heat settings with good drainage, where some of these dwarfs like Tiny Tim have an extended growth period season, and they can just grow out and make not giant, but they're getting
much larger than they're going to get in a normal setting.
Yeah, we're talking 8 to 10 feet tall in 8 to 10 years, which normally Tiny Tim would be a quarter to half that size.
And one of the things they have going on, especially down there at Dr. Creech's garden there in Nacogdoches in the Ruby Mays Azalea garden, they have 3 extra seasons than us. So it's kind of crazy. So they don't really start finishing their fall color until December. And then they're leafing back out. I mean, for us, fall for us is November, and we start to leaf out maybe the first week of April, maybe the last of March. We're talking down there, I don't know if these things ever shut down. I mean, in that setting there, they're going dormant maybe late December. Maybe. I mean, I've seen him post fall color pictures in January before, which is nuts, right? And so then they're leafing back out into February. I mean, so that you're talking at least how many extra months on us right there? At least 2 to 3 conservatively.
It's crazy.
Extra months of growth. So yeah, that can be a big factor in in that. And also, did the tree really even shut down if it was such a quick dormancy? They just kind of kept growing the whole year. Interesting quality there.
Down there, they just call it Tim. They don't call it Tiny Tim.
Yeah, it's just Tim. Well, it's like you. You started out a lot tinier.
I did, and I've gotten a lot bigger. I'm no longer Tiny Tim.
All right, coming in here at lucky number 13, we've got one of our introductions. It's Acer palmatum Cupid.
So this is a witch's broom that was found on a coral bark Japanese maple. Now, whether that coral bark was Benikawa or Sangukaku, we really couldn't tell you. Likely a Sangukaku. Matt and I were deciding that, today was a hard day at the work at the nursery, and we were going to go down to Side Street Pizza in Tryon, North Carolina. And we drove down, and in Tryon, North Carolina, we found a witch's broom on Sangukaku or a coral bark Japanese maple.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was actually fall color. It's the one I mentioned earlier in the thing. And the fall color was different than the original plant. Now, we weren't grafting then. We went in and introduced ourselves to the owners of the home and explained that we're crazy people that like to walk around his yard and look at trees. We do this a lot. So we have the card ready when we go make all of our knocking on your door. If you see us ringing your doorbell, you might have something interesting going on horticulturally in your yard, just saying. But we actually explained to them what we wanted to do. And we said, hey, look, we would like to come back when we're out of leaf and obtain some sign wood off this tree as well. So when we were going to get our sign wood, it's another great day to get some pizza. Happened to be Valentine's. And so Cupid fit that name when we were grafting it, kind of put it in our mind to name that one Cupid. Now, honorable mention here, I could easily throw in something like Little Sango, another interesting dwarf coral bark witch's broom. There's a few of those now in the trade that are pretty nice. Cupid's been one of our higher performers. It's done really well. It stayed small. One that I actually will throw some shade at here while we're on it is Fagelheim. Fagelheim is a dwarf coral bark with shortened center nodes. So you'll distinctly see Fagelheim being different because it has that center node going on. And it's one I haven't been able to grow successfully. I've had people tell me like they love this plant, and I say, hold on.
I was going to throw shade at it too.
Right.
Because people often say, well, Cupid and these others, they don't show that shortened center node. Well, show me a Fagelheim growing well in your garden, because you probably won't have one. And if you do, you'll brag about it and it will die next week, because it is a finicky plant for us. And first off, we can't pronounce the name well. I mean, it's got F-J-E-L-L-A-G-I-M. I mean, that's just a crazy name to begin with.
Sounds like Thor's hammer to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, the thing is a little bit of a dog. I always let people know. People will say, oh, it grows great for me. And I say, how many seasons have you had it? And that always kills me, because no matter what tree I'm talking about, people will tell me, well, it grows great for me. And I'm like, how long have you been growing it? Since October. Like, all right, well, hey, I'm not tooting my own horn here, but me and Tim have been at this for a second. Give it a minute. It's going to die.
We've killed many Fagelheims. We don't cross off a maple off of our do not produce list,
right?
Until we've killed it many times. And did we do something wrong? Nope. Did we try it in a container? Did we try it in sun? Did we try it in shade? Did we try it a million different ways trying to keep this tree alive? Yes, we did, and we failed every single time. So I don't recommend Fagelheim. But Cupid, on the other hand,
excellent plant.
Yeah, you get the dwarf compact habit you get with a witch's broom, and you get that red bark during the winter months.
Makes it perfect for the container garden. A lot of people are looking for that dense coral bark habit. They don't want something that's getting too large. Cupid's perfect for that mid-sized shape, for something that's not going to be as big as Sangukaku, but still give you the great fall colors and the great bark interest.
All right, coming at number 12, Acer palmatum erytama.
Beautiful red. Now, this one has that shortened center node very distinctly on it. It's one of the prominent features of the leaf, and it really shows out, especially in that spring garden. You can almost get some picked up cherry reds on it going on. Beautiful, beautiful broom.
I think this would go higher on many people's lists in different areas, because it has become a very popular tree in the nursery trade. I mean, it has a little bit larger foliage to it. It has a brick red kind of color. Right after it gives a little bit brighter red color in the spring. You get some nice emerald colors starting coming into it, and some good orange fall color. But this one just makes a nice rounded habit. And it appears to be a really unique broom. It's slightly on the finicky side. I would say for witch's brooms, it's slightly on the finicky side, and that's probably why it goes so far up on our list and our climate for us.
Yeah, I think you're going to be okay if you're doing that one. Erytama zone 6 and above. I think zone 5 may a little bit too cold for it. Sometimes with some of these brooms, the trick is getting them to shut down well. You've heard us talk a lot about not over fertilizing your plants. And it's very important with brooms. They can often be on a little bit different schedule than some of the other palmatums. So you don't want to keep them too active in the winter months in areas like this where we do experience a real winter. We're in zone 6B here. Aratama grows fine for me, but I do think it can be a little trickier in that zone 5 setting. It is one of those ones that likes the heat a little bit more.
So coming at number 11, we've got another one by Skeeter Rod. This is one called Acer Palmatum Elizabeth. And Skeeter found this as a witch's broom and named it after his wife, Elizabeth Rod.
Beautiful plant. Now, I've had this one just get some funky shades. People really respond to the pictures of this one. I've had purples in it. I've had reds. I mean, it's had some really overall interesting colors to it. And it's one of those ones that, you know, put this in the container garden, pair it with any of your other brooms. It's really going to bring a different color palette to the table in that short, dense habit.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I like it probably best midsummer. You get that green, light green, that lime green coming into that red during the midsummer, and it just grabs your attention. It stands out from all the other witches' brooms with that midsummer color, that lime green being infused in that brighter red color. I mean, for a unique color on a witch's broom, Elizabeth is an awesome plant.
Now, not the same as Carl's Corner broom, but I'll throw this interesting tidbit in about this one. You know, when people were talking about naming it after the area where you found it, I know that specifically Mary Catherine and Carl's Corner broom, Carly's Corner broom, I've seen it a million different ways in the trade, are the same plant. I know N.J. Acer did an interesting experiment one time where he basically created a Dan Sugi where he grafted both Carl's Corner broom and Mary Catherine onto the same rootstock to compare them. I think that's a great way to compare brooms if you're looking to find out if something's truly the same. Now, Elizabeth stands out from those, but it is another one of those purple or colors, so maybe think of that. But it's interesting, and it does help if nurserymen disclose where they found the plant, so there's not two of the same one.
And then he found out that it wasn't really a Dansugi. It was really just a multi-graft of the same plant. Because Carlos Corner and Mary Catherine or Catherine Elizabeth are the exact same plant.
Well, speaking of Ed Shin, here at number 10, we got an Ed Shin introduction on our list, and that's KGB or King George broom. Now, Ed's son lives in Maryland, and they found this one on King George Boulevard there in Maryland. Now, Ed had this one as a working name of like the top secret name is KGB. So KGB was kind of the top secret plant they had found there. And King George Boulevard is where the tree was found. Now I have seen Ed discuss it as King George broom and KGB. No matter what you list it as, excellent dwarf broom. And I love the color patterns on this. I know it was personally one of Tom's favorite trees. We gave one to the late, great Tom Cox, and he said one of his favorite plants in his garden.
This is one of the plants, KGB, King George broom, either name, it's got a good name for the road. And so it's got a great name for the witch's broom. The interesting thing about this broom is, you know, when they found this tree, and they still don't really know, it was found so low on the tree that it almost looks like you have a witch's broom that has a rootstock that comes out from below it that's grown up with the tree above it.
Yeah, there was some debate whether it was on like a 7-foot standard and it was a pre-existing broom that had been lost to the trade. I mean, what if KGB is Red Devil and we found it all along? And we don't really know because Dick Wolf would be selling that area. It looks to be a new independent broom. I think that's the general consensus of everybody that's looked at the pictures of it.
There's nothing else like it in the nursery trade. That's the one thing that is for certain is there's nothing else.
It doesn't exist under any name.
But it was so low of a witch's broom that you look at it and you're like, is this a graft? Is this a graft with a rootstock on it, or is this?
You can see that being one of those Dick Wolf high grafts too.
Yeah,
like a 6-foot high graft.
Yeah, and so it's so unique. But KGB, King George broom, gives you some really nice bright reds. It gets some greens infused in there, and lime greens get almost like some yellow colors midsummer if you have it with some sunlight. I mean, for a tight, dense, compact broom, good colors, but a fun story behind that plant as well.
Yeah, special thanks to Ed and Debbie Shin for getting that one into the trade. Really cool plant, and one that's been very popular for us each time we've offered. I think it brings a little something different to the broom game.
Coming at number 9, we've got Acer palmatum Scarlet Princess. And Scarlet Princess was found as a witch's broom on the cultivar Crimson Queen by our friends Tom and Nancy Ash. Now, you may have seen this sometimes as Ash's Scarlet Princess. We originally got this name under the name Scarlet Princess from Tom Ash. And we were one of the people that got it early, and we actually paid royalties on the first 2 or 3 years that we'd produced this plant.
He had a gentleman's agreement, which was a fun thing back in the day. Like, basically, we got it from him, and we paid him $1 for every graft for, I think, the first 2 or 3 years that we had it. And we honored that agreement for sure with him. And we leave it as Scarlet Princess because that is the exact tag it had on it when I got it from Tom Ash. Really interesting plant, though. This one does tend to change the shape a good bit. This one is going to have, you know, a very arching habit to it for its habit. So it kind of grows up and out. Looks very different from Crimson Queen, not only in shape, but a little bit in color as well.
And this is our first witch's broom that we've got on this list, and really our only witch's broom on this list that's off of a lace leaf Japanese maple, which is very unique in itself. There's baby lace that was a broom on a lace leaf Japanese maple.
I'm gonna throw some shade at that one too. Don't grow baby lace.
You won't often find baby lace. You might find baby lace Lexington, which isn't a witch's broom,
Good plant.
but you won't find baby lace often on Mr. Maple because it is a little more finicky plant. I mean, you can keep one about 2 to 3 years, and that's about its lifespan.
Don't smile at it too long. Don't brag on it too hard. That's
As soon as somebody says, "Oh, I've got a big baby lace," and then it's dead the next week.
that one's kind of a wimp. But I will say Scarlet Princess is a much more durable broom on a lace leaf. This is a lace leaf broom that tends to hold up well. It's another one I would say probably 6 through 9 is a little bit more durable in that zone 5, but very showy plant. Excellent for someone looking for a compact dwarf lace leaf for a container because it's going to have pink reds to that Crimson Queen color. You can get some maroons in it late, but it's often more of a pink picked up red early, so it kind of changes the color a little bit. And, you know, that habit and that density to it really lends itself great, I think, to a container garden.
And it has more of that ball shape to it with a slight weeping habit. So it's very unique, being that it is a witch's broom found on a weeping Japanese maple. I've got a little bit brighter picked up reds in the spring on Scarlet Princess than I have on Crimson Queen before. And the name is Scarlet Princess, but I think it goes to crimson colors in the fall. I mean, amazing red dwarf compact Japanese maple.
All right, y'all, coming in here, we're all the way up to number 8 on our list, and we've got Kunara Pygmy. This is another Acer palmatum Kunara Pygmy. Now, Kunara Pygmy is another Japanese maple from down under. This one comes from Australia. This is an introduction by Yamina Rare Plant Nursery, and they were actually visiting a restaurant called Kunara, and it was an Italian restaurant, and they had Japanese maples planted outside of it, and they were eating dinner, and they looked over and saw this broom and a green palmatum, and they grafted that, and that's what became Acer palmatum Kunara Pygmy.
Yeah, and at Kunara Springs Restaurant, they basically got like an arboretum around their restaurant, and off their patio, there's a big Acer palmatum, and that's where that witch's broom was found.
I'd have named it spaghetti and meatballs, so I'm glad I didn't find it.
AJT's found so many cool plants. I mean, he found peaches and cream, fairy lights. I mean, he introduced so many awesome plants. And Kunara Pygmy is a tight, compact, green, dwarf Japanese maple that gets, 6 to 8 foot. So it's a vigorous witch's broom. 6 to 8 foot in 10 years. It is more tight and compact than, many other trees. It makes a nice shrub form out in the landscape. Super heat tolerant and some good red fall color.
Definitely a little faster growing than some of the other dwarf greens on this list. I like too that you get some weird pink red on this one. So it is a green tree, but especially late summer and sun, you get this blushing of like pink growth going on over top of it. I think it really adds to the ornamental quality of Kunara Pygmy. Makes it interesting. You can kind of get this faded out yellow, white to pink color going on. And I think it really just adds to its ornamental qualities, especially if it's a full sun tree. Now, we've mentioned many times the broom characteristic often comes with this added sun-tolerant superpower. So there is a little bit of genetic change to them. Sometimes a tree that couldn't necessarily handle full sun, the broom version of it may be able to. And Kunara Pygmy, excellent sun plant.
Now, Kunara Pygmy is one of these plants, too, that I have collected seed on a witch's broom before.
Yeah.
And witch's brooms are known for not having a lot of seed. We hadn't even talked about this much.
Not viable seed.
And the seed itself, it's not really supposed to create a seed, or at least people don't find many seeds on witch's brooms. And I talked with Dr. Richard Olson, who's the director of the National Arboretum, and he's a genius when it comes to plants. He said, well, if you find seed on a witch's broom, I would expect 50% of those seedlings to be witch's broom-like, have that tighter, dense, compact habit, and 50% not. And that's based on Sid Waxman's research with pines. I mean, 50% of his offspring from his witch's broom seeds on pine trees displayed that tighter compact habit while 50% didn't. And Cunara pygmy, I've found seed on it before, but I've never found seed that was viable or mature.
Yeah, a lot of it tends to be parthenocarpic, meaning it isn't a fully developed nutlet. It just doesn't make it to germination. So it's interesting. It's one to keep looking through. I think that and Brant's dwarf are the two brooms I've tend to seen seed on the most. We found seed on Brant's dwarf at the National Arboretum there in D.C. as well one time. None of them came up. So interesting prospect there. I've definitely found seed on Twombly's Red Sentinel, maybe Skeeter's broom, I think. But I've never got any of those to actually germinate. So let us know if you've ever got some germination and you're keeping good, accurate records on where your seed are. People always tell me this, and then they're like, this is my seedling from, Shayna, and then it's like a 8-foot green. I'm like, I don't think that's right. Might need to Mari Povich that one. I think you might have got the wrong genetics going on there. You are not the father, but definitely keep good records on where you're doing it. But if you've been able to germinate some seed from a Japanese maple broom, let us know. We're very interested in that kind of thing.
We need to hire somebody like Sue Weegriff to come in and see if she can help us get a witch's broom to fully develop seed.
She could do it.
If anybody could do it, she could do it. Go check out our podcast with Sue Weegriff. She talks about crazy things and how to, manipulate seeds to make them come out earlier in the season, but also to actually give them energy on seeds that don't have a fully developed seed to actually make those come out.
Yeah, maybe some of those could be doing some of those recovery feedings that she was talking about and actually bring some of those lesser developed parthenocarpic seeds to fruition. That'd be interesting.
That would be.
All right, coming in here at number 7, got Fireball, y'all.
Now, Fireball was a selection that was found by Dave Vercade. You mentioned the Vercade family earlier. They'd found many witches' brooms on conifers. And this was found on the way. He was going to visit Nancy Vermeulen, or coming back from, and found Acer palmatum Fireball growing out there not too far from there.
Awesome plant. This one had to be on our list. It's one of the most highly sought after. I would say one of the fastest to sell out brooms we do. People love dwarfs. People love reds. And this gives you both. It's a dwarf red Japanese maple. It's got fiery colors to it. It's got all that splash of that high intensity picked up bright, bright, almost pink red going on. So it really has that glowing effect to it. Fireball is a showy broom, but it's also a durable, compact, dense habit. It's going to look great in a patio planter. I mean, throw this one in a planter. It's going to do everything you need there, and it's going to provide texture, color, and ever-changing beauty of a Japanese maple, but all in that nice, dense, compact habit.
I mean, what's in a name? Everything. Everything's in the name for the Japanese maples, and Fireball just so accurately describes this dwarf Japanese maple. I mean, with the spring color being red, the bright red fall color, that dense, compact, ball-shaped habit, Fireball, a perfect name Dave Vercade put on there. And again, later this has been started being called Vercade's Fireball. But, Fireball was the original name that we got on it from Dave Vercade.
All right, we're all the way up to number 6.
Number 6 is Acer palmatum Shayna. This is probably one of the most popular witches' brooms of any tree on this list.
Now, I probably could have argued this one up higher, to be honest with you. It's one of the brooms that really showed people witches' brooms and made them popular. This is a very early on tree. We did talk a lot about Red Maple Nurseries this podcast as well, but Red Maple Nurseries really popularized so much about Japanese maples that we do today. They named this tree after Billy Schwartz's daughter, Shayna. The name Shayna means Hebrew for beautiful. So, beautiful little broom here. It is a dwarf compact red. Now, you've probably heard us tell the story. Tim and I, we went to the campus there in Villanova. We visited the original Shayna. It's at the Department of Public Safety there. It was raining. They said, who are these crazy people? Again, we marched out with the card. We said, listen, I promise I'm not crazy, but I want to jump around in the area out here and get cuttings off this tree that's about 9 feet up in the air. And they said, sure, you seem crazy. We'll let you do that. And we're going to be filming some video out here too, we told them. So, shift change continues to happen all day. So Tim and I are out there in a rainstorm under a tree, and it's a Department of Public Safety. So, of course, every public safety officer is like, what the heck are these guys doing?
Who are you? What are you doing? Why are you here? Why are you filming? Why are you trying to take cuttings out of this tree? Why are you jumping like a lunatic underneath this?
Why is the big guy running and jumping and cutting grafts out of this tree? So we did graft from the original source. Whenever possible, we love to graft from the very first of a Japanese maple, so there's not a lot of genetic drift. So our Shaynas do typically come from the original one.
Now, Shayna was found by Dick Wolf. and named by Dick Wolf after Billy Schwartz's daughter, Shayna. And that's sort of where the Wolf's broom we mentioned earlier was found by Billy Schwartz and named for Dick Wolf.
They kind of traded those.
Yeah, exactly. And Shayna, which is Billy Schwartz's daughter, is Hebrew for beautiful. That's what the name means. It's a tree that's traveled all around the world. It's probably one of the most popular red witch's brooms on the nursery trade. I don't think there's another red dwarf Japanese maple that has become more popular all around the world, and it's because this tree is a good tree. I mean, it's tight, dense, compact, can handle some sun situations, great for containers. It fits in those small spaces.
All right, y'all, we're breaking into the top 5. If you're a Japanese maple aficionado and you're watching along, especially on the YouTube, let us know in the chat below what your top 5 witches brooms are. If you're listening to us on a podcast, we're not leaving you out. Head over to Mr. Maple Friends. That's a great place to interact with us. It's on Facebook. Just go to the Mr. Maple Friends group. Let us know your top 5 witches broom Japanese maples. We would love to hear from you. So we're breaking into our top 5 Japanese maples. And at number 5, we've got the columnar one. We've got Twombly's Red Sentinel.
This was found by Ken Twombly of Connecticut. And this was found as a dwarf broom, and he grafted it and put it out there in the landscape. And after a while, he looked out there and said, that looks like a sentinel. And it became Twombly's Red Sentinel. Now, the unique thing about this tree is in Connecticut, where Ken Twombly's from, they actually use this tree often as a hedge. And they'll take this tree and they'll line out this Japanese maple, this red Japanese maple, and make a Japanese maple hedge out of this taller growing, unique broom. That's such a unique way to grow a Japanese maple. I'd never thought about growing a Japanese maple as a hedge until I heard this from Ken Twombly.
Oh, excellent plant. I mean, this one's got everything you want in a Japanese maple. It's typically my top choice when somebody's looking for a columnar plant. When grown properly, this one truly can give you some columnar habits to it. I don't recommend trimming out the central leader, and I do recommend growing it in more sunlight. If you're growing it in heavy shade, you will get some width going on there. And if you're trimming that central leader, you'll get some more shoots going on. So you want to trim this one to keep it more of a central leader look to it, but let the central leader go. Awesome, narrow form here. It almost reminds me of like a columnar fire glow. It's got a lot of the things you like about fire glow. It's heat tolerant. It's red. It's got that cherry red spring color. It holds its color well late into the season. It goes to a very nice bold red in the fall. So it's really got a lot of what people are looking for. And, we're losing space in everybody's garden. So not everybody has room for a blood good, a large upright red. Twombly's Red Sentinel fits that red need in your garden. It provides that splash of color, but in a much smaller, narrow habit to it.
I mean, the color on Twombly's Red Sentinel is something to select this tree for on its own. I mean, it really does have that bright red spring color.
One more bright.
And a really good bright red fall color as well. We got this tree and made it pretty popular because we were being featured on an episode of Growing a Greener World with Joe Lample. And you can go check that video out on YouTube, just Growing a Greener World, Mr. Maple. And we're walking around the garden and we talk about Twombly's Red Sentinel. We're like, this is an awesome plant. And then all of a sudden, the demand for Twombly's Red Sentinel just went crazy on us. And it's because it is an awesome plant. It can be used in so many places in the landscape. I mean, it's tall, it's narrow, it adds that vertical. If you've been watching some of our landscaping with Bubs, with Sean, it adds that vertical interest out there in the landscape. So you can put it out there and it draws your eye from the base of the tree all the way up. So you see the garden at its fullest. You can put this tree on the corner of your house and it doesn't get wide and it gets tall and narrow. So it fits that and adds color interest while still fitting in that small space. So it's such an easy tree to use out in the landscape.
All right, y'all, coming in here at number 4, we've got Acer palmatum Orion. That's another one by Billy Schwartz and Dick Wolf. This one was named by Dick Wolf at Red Maple Nurseries. I'm sure Billy had something to do with all his broom findings, but this is a fun one. Orion has that almost Matson Murray style leaf to it, so it's a little more unique amongst brooms because it has a more elongated foliage to it and a distinct shortened center node.
And this is one of those plants that's real unusual and different because Orion has distinct characteristics of getting wide and short and, wider than it does tall. And it's got a really good red color to it. And it goes to some really nice shades of yellows and oranges in the fall. and really just very unique in that habit because
I've seen excellent oranges on this one. I mean, showstopper orange.
you go from red to orange, which is really unusual, really, really unusual. It made me wonder if it was named Orion after like Orion's belt because that's a star. But Orion is it's just an outstanding plant with some outstanding color changes. It's really unusual though with Orion because there's Orions with short center nodes and there's Orions without short center nodes. And so we start to see some of these plants that are a witch's broom. So they definitely have that tight, compact habit. But some of the plants that you graft from this will have witch's brooms, so they'll have that short and center node. On the leaf, they'll have that witch's broom leaf, and others won't. But they're the same shape, same color, and same fall color.
You get some crazy colors on this one too, whether it's pink with yellow in the early spring. You can almost get some brick colors on this midsummer. I mean, it really shows out. It kind of continues to change. I've had some mauves. I've had times where it looks more like Bronze Age in the color pattern. It really continues to change all season, and it just gives you something, I think, every single season. But I think the most shocking change is that yellow-orange fall color. It's really a showstopper when it gets into that display. Nice, compact, dense habit to it. A little bit more wide than tall on this one, so you're looking at a tree that even a 6 to 7 foot tall tree that's going to be 7 to 8 foot wide. So it gets that width going on to it, but a beautiful compact plant.
So coming in at number 3, we've got Acer palmatum Jerry Schwartz. Now, Jerry Schwartz, as you might guess, was related to Billy Schwartz. It's actually his mother. And Jerry Schwartz is a dwarf Japanese maple that Billy had found as a witch's broom, that it was, tight, dense, compact. But I love this tree because it has unique colors and a narrow habit.
Well, another one that has a little bit more of that Matsumura style leaf too. You get an elongated leaf, which is just funky. It makes it frilly. I say this a lot, but it makes it look a little bit more regal. Has that more accentuated, it's just got something a little extra going on in the petioles.
The spring color on Jerry Schwartz can be like a pink bronze, which is really unusual and really different. The midsummer colors, it just keeps putting on unique colors all throughout the season that makes this tree stand out. You get some really nice shades of like bronze reds, that's orange bronze, which is unlike anything else. And the fall colors can be some really nice shades of oranges to reds.
I think my favorite time for this one is that midsummer. You get some funky growth, especially if you're giving this one morning sun, late day shade. I've had it be, kind of a bronzing again for color, but almost a blue, emeraldy, old green on the older growth with then like pink to purple accentuations on that. It's really funky.
Now, you know how you've got green penguin, which is a pine that is tight and dense and compact and narrow. And then you've got globosa, which has this weird globose growth to it. Jerry Schwartz is more like the latter. Whenever it has its growth, it has these weird globose growths to it, but still stays with that narrow habit. And it's so unique and different in that. And it fits in smaller spaces, but it gets some height to it. It can get 6 to 7 foot in 10 years, but it stays tight and dense while doing that and giving you some unique colors. And that's the reason why it's came in number 3 on my list.
Yeah, it's funky. I love it. It definitely gives you a little bit more of a columnar feel to it, especially when young. And you can get, like Tim was saying, a 6 foot tall tree isn't any more than about 4 foot wide. So it has this upright, kind of puts on those crazy arms like Macawa a little bit. You get those little, that animated quality going on with Jerry Schwartz. It's a fun plant for color, texture, and it's a tree that you'll not only see here in the United States. I will see this in garden centers in Belgium and Holland and the UK. It's a Japanese maple like Shana that's made it all around the world, and it's popular no matter where you're at. It's kind of cool when you go and you talk to Billy and you hang out with him. We used to go up back and hang out with him when he was back at Green Mansion Nurseries, and you talk to him about where the originals and things were found. And then I go to Belgium and I just see this at a garden center being sold. I'm like, I know I know him.
I know that we had asked Billy, have you ever see it on a witch's broom? And he said, well, I did see it on the original Jerry Schwartz. And then he went back to check out the original Jerry Schwartz, and unfortunately that broom had died. And that's the unfortunate thing about many of these witch's brooms. When you find a witch's broom, you need to graft it and then, and then evaluate it, because often a graft of a witch's broom will be much healthier than the witch's broom on the original tree. And a tree like Shana, that tree, the original broom is still on the tree on Villanova's campus. But
they may become crowded out. They may become too shaded out as the tree matures. They may
get too heavy for the branch by developing a dense, compact habit and fall out.
Right. Sometimes they have that little bitty like almost smaller growth before it gets to the larger growth on a broom. And, ice storms up north are kind of their worst enemy. I mean, the brooms will fall during the ice storms.
Little Lamb died this past winter at our uncle's house.
Ice storm will take them out.
And I was so thankful that we had grafted it because now we can continue to evaluate that dwarf mutation and see what it does.
By getting it onto a green, healthy understock, you can continue those traits that otherwise wouldn't have been able to continue.
All right, guys, coming at number 2, another Billy Schwartz introduction. And this is one that many of y'all probably have now in your garden because we talked about it before. We listed on a 10 at 10. Man,
you guys listen. We made something popular quick.
I think there were, just almost 100 of y'all out there now with Judy Girl Brooms. Judy Girl Broom, Acer Prom made him Judy Girl Broom, coming at number 2. This is a witch's broom that was found by Billy Schwartz. And this thing just is so unique and so different. It's got a little bit larger foliage, and it has that short and center node. A really tight, compact habit. Matt and I went and visited him in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, and he took us to see this original tree. And it's this really old Japanese maple right beside the power lines, and right up towards the power line, close to it, is this witch's broom that's happening. And Matt and I got to go and just, see what this witch's broom looked like that he'd found. And then we got cuttings off of Acer Prom made him Judy Girl Broom. We started grafting them. It's quickly becoming one of our most popular and one of our favorite witch's brooms in the nursery trade.
It's very crisp. It's almost like a cartoon broom. Like, it's exactly what you think of when you think of a witch broom. It's dense. It's got very flat foliage. It's got very distinctive characteristics to it. I love this plant. It's beautiful. Billy Schwartz said this was the best broom he ever named. And you have to listen when he says that, because the guy's probably found 80 to 100 brooms if you count all of his conifers. And
it is named after his current girlfriend, though.
Yeah, so he's probably getting sweet on her. He probably bumps it up a little bit on the list.
That's like Matt saying his favorite Japanese maple's hot blonde.
Can I ever change that now? Can I ever change?
You named it after your wife.
I mean, what if I said, I like redhead Olivia? I'm done, right? I'm done. So yeah, that probably helps with Judy Girl Broom. I'm not gonna lie, that probably bumps up a little bit in his listings, but for us, it has been everything you want in a broom Japanese maple. It really is like the perfect little tight red upright dwarf compact broom, perfect in a container, perfect in the landscape. Put this in a conifer garden, you're going to get that deciduous splash going on. I often recommend blue containers, but you can do whatever you want. But blue containers really show out with red Japanese maples. Put some sedum in there, get some yellow, blue, and green going on with this color. It is amazing.
Yeah, and the colors on this in the springtime got some nice reds. Right now, we're talking about July, August time frame. You're getting some emerald greens coming into this. It gives it such a unique color pattern on this tree. This is a tight, dense, compact tree, and the leaf, as Billy Schwartz will tell you, is unlike any other witch's broom. It's a lot larger, a lot more round, and it's so unique and so different. I mean, it really is a witch's broom on not a Matsumuri, but a witch's broom on more of that Aminum-style foliage. And because of that, this makes such a fun, extremely small-growing dwarf witch's broom selection.
It's another one you get some real show-out colors on this one in the summer. I mean, I would say even in that late summer new growth, you get that kind of emeraldy older growth. You get that pink splashes going on top of it. It really, it's a color that contrasts with itself. You can get lime greens, yellows, pinks, almost emerald colors on the older growth, all on one plant at one time. And then still next spring, you're going back to that bold overall red. So you've got all kinds of things going on there.
Coming at number 1.
Matthew. I mean, there's not a better named tree than Matthew. I think we can end it right here. Now, Matthew was an honorable mention on our list. Another Billy Schwartz one. We got Pink Princess.
Yeah, Matthew, that was a good plant, though. It has some of that sort of light green color to it. It's a different shade of green than all the other witch's brooms.
It gets a little big for a broom.
It does. People always say it's a small dwarf, but I mean, we've got a 6-foot Matthew.
Much like Matthew Nichols.
We've got about
tends to continue to expand.
Our Matthew at Hillstone Arboretum is about 6'3", about the same size as Matt.
Right. It's a big boy in the garden now.
But it's also 20+ years old.
So coming in at number 1, though, not named for Matt or Tim, we have Pink Princess.
But also named by Matt and Tim. This is a selection that was found by Carl Munn on a Benishishahinga as a witch's broom out in the field. He's got some huge field-grown Japanese maples, and happening on this Benishishahinga out in his gardens, one of his workers found this witch's broom, and Carl took some cuttings off it and mailed it to us and said, guys, I think this will fit your market a little bit. And we asked him, and we said, hey, could we name this Pink Princess? And he said, sure. And it has that same sort of pink color in the spring around the outside edge. So it gives you some good variegation. It appears to be more stable than its parent. The parent, we always say the parent is the plant that is found as a witch's broom on, and is more stable on its variegation than Benishishahinga.
Shout out to Carl. You know Carl Munn from Moonrise. That's one of his famous introductions. Blue Moon, Moonrise. He's had many big hits. Pink Princess was one that, like, he kind of let us do our thing with it. He was like, this fits your market a little bit more than mine, but we made sure to get it back to him and really make sure he had the cultivar as well. Broom on Benishishahinga, which was super interesting because Benishishahinga being that pink and red, you know, Pink Princess has everything you love about that, but in that small, compact, dense habit. I would almost compare it to having, you know, something like Shayna X Benishishahinga. So all that habit that you like about Shayna, but all that color that you like about Benishishahinga. Amazing plant to be growing. Shout out to Carl. He's had some health issues. We got to go and visit him back in June and reconnect with him, and it's so much fun. Carl's always been a mentor to Tim and I here, and someone that's been super helpful. I took grafting classes with him at Pat Dye's. Carl's just one of those guys that's always went out of his way to be kind and share knowledge with Tim and I as we've been coming up in the nursery industry.
Genius when it comes to plants. I mean, he introduced the cultivar Moonrise, which is his tree that many of y'all may have in the nursery trade. Pink Princess, that was a tree that he found as well. We just got to introduce it here at MrMaple.
Helped us redefine a lot of the ways we graft when we were very starting out here at MrMaple. We went and studied what he did and kind of improved our whole grafting methods.
Now, one thing about Pink Princess is it has really tiny foliage. The foliage is much tinier than the foliage you find on Benishishahinga, so there's something change happening there. Again, it's changing somehow because it's a little more stable. And this is one of those few plants that you find in the nursery trade that is both a witch's broom and is variegated.
Yeah, now Pink Princess is definitely a unicorn amongst plants. You know, I tell the story sometimes when I'm talking about this one, but I believe we were at IPPS, and we were having this discussion with Todd Lazane and many other
Barry
Yinger. Yeah, Barry was actually the one that brought it up, and there were many affluent nurserymen, and they were trying to think of plants that were both brooms and sports. So they were variegated plants, but also brooms. So you have two different genetic mutations going on here. You have a variegation gene and a broom gene.
Metasequoia glyptoseboides white spot had a witch's broom on it, which became Sherman's Nordlich.
And I also thought of Pebe Maribo, which is the variegated form of American. When you get into Japanese maples, I could only think of Pink Princess. We had this one in evaluation, so we came up with all three of those for him because Tim and I are huge plant geeks, and we had to show out that we knew three plants that were variegated and brooms. But there are extremely rare novelties amongst plants to be a broom and variegated. And I think amongst Japanese maples, it makes Pink Princess kind of a really special plant. Now, with the time we named this one, I was expecting a daughter. My daughter Carolina is 6 years old now. We were grafting it and thinking about names on it probably about 8 years before. So it's been a minute since we've had it. But when we started really thinking about names for it was around the time when we were expecting Carolina. And so I was thinking my daughter would like a Pink Princess. Everybody's got that soft spot for that little girl in their life. And we were thinking about Pink Princess. Carl, being the humble guy he is, wanted us to check with Talon and make sure it wasn't too close to Japanese Princess. Talon said, no way, that's great. Go with Pink Princess. That's a beautiful name. That's what I'd call it. And that's the marketing name. So Pink Princess kind of took there for this broom. And it's always a special place in our heart. You probably know Benishishahinga is my mom's favorite tree. Well, Pink Princess has everything that has, but a little bit of an improvement.
Now, when we grafted this from the very first batch, we actually had a few plants that were reverted from that. And I wish we could find those today.
Yeah, they were off the original broom, though, so those genetics didn't continue.
And those were actually green, basically reversions of Pink Princess.
So we could have got two trees.
We could have got two brooms out of it, because I don't know where those other brooms happened to be.
I've never had one of the variegated forms revert, though. So I've never had what we collected and continued on as Pink Princess, like the best. So once we grafted all these grafts from all over the broom, then we selected the best form of that to become it.
And then right now we have probably 400 to 600 Pink Princesses on site, and not one is showing reversion. Yeah, and I can't say the same thing if I had 400 to 600 Benishishahingas.
It's a great plant. I mean, it really has impressed me. And again, it'll trick you a little bit. I've seen people say, oh, this one's very vigorous. It gets out there at first, but then it slows down. A lot of those brooms, when you first graft them, they have that genetics to kind of fill out quickly. So you'll get a foot, maybe even a 1.5 foot tree pretty fast, but it takes a long time to exceed that. It's going to start to put on a lot of interior growth after that, and then broom up, as we use that as a verb, broom up a little bit, get denser and fuller.
And Matt's got daughters, and they love everything princess and love everything pink. And so we said Pink Princess, that's got to be the name on this tree. And it really has been a very unique Japanese maple that is different, tighter, compact. It's vigorous at a young age and then just denses up, but such a really cool plant and a really cool witch's broom.
So now I got a 1.5-year-old guy. We need to find a new broom.
We do.
All right, y'all, that's our list of witch's brooms. I hope you enjoyed our discussion on what witch's brooms are. We wanted to give you kind of a little precursor to this one to kind of get into, what we're talking about here. And again, not all brooms have that short and center node, so not everything on our list has exact same traits, but you kind of get that category feel for it.
And we thought we'd bring a unique thing in here that we talked about witch's brooms, talk about the history behind these witch's brooms, but also bring you a top 20 list.
A little bit of a hybrid.
A little bit of a hybrid. We talked about some of the things, but at the same time, you're getting a talk show and a top 20 list.
So guys, make sure to subscribe here on the Mr. Maple Show if you love having a weekly talk show about Japanese maples. And if you're a collector, I sure hope you do, because we love talking about this kind of thing. We're super niche and we're a small family business, so it's fun to be able to get on here, discuss our passions and loves with you guys. And if you like this kind of thing, make sure to subscribe to us, give us a 5-star rating on those major podcast platforms. Get in that YouTube live chat. It's a lot of fun. There's a great community going on there. And we really appreciate everybody that will take that step further and shop with us on Mr. Maple. We provide all this weekly content at no additional charge to you guys. So we're providing all this great content for free. If you want to reward us for doing that, the best way is shopping with us on Mr. Maple. We appreciate your loyalty.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a super cool, awesome, super duper